A journey spanning 33 years, difficult, winding, and at times dramatic. The relationship between Ukraine and NATO has gone through several stages. Kyiv was one step away from receiving the map, the membership action plan for joining the alliance, and at the same time declared a non-aligned status. The alliance leadership has repeatedly promised, very soon, Ukraine will be under the common security umbrella. But that never happened. Why? Let's figure it out. 6 months after Ukraine declared its independence, in February 1992, NATO Secretary General Manfred Warner came to Kyiv. For many people who had been taught since childhood by Soviet propaganda that NATO was an aggressive bloc and a mortal threat, this visit became a turning point in their worldview. A little later, Ukrainian President Leonid Kravchuk visited the alliance's headquarters in Brussels. And in 1994, Ukraine became the first post-Soviet state to sign an agreement with NATO called the Partnership for Peace. 3 years later, another important document appeared, the Charter on a Distinctive Partnership. In Madrid, it was signed by Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma.
Ukraine has made its choice and is ready, together with NATO countries and alliance partners, to take an active part in building a secure future for Europe. And not just for Europe, but for the whole world.
From this moment on, Ukraine becomes an active participant in NATO-led missions. Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq. Ukraine has sent its ships 6 times in support of Active Endeavour, the counter-terrorism operation in the Mediterranean Sea, and has also actively joined anti-piracy raids. At international exercises such as Peace Shield, Cossack Steppe, Sea Breeze, and Rapid Trident, Ukrainian troops have demonstrated some of the best results. And that's both on land, at sea, and in the air. In 2008, at the Bucharest summit, Ukraine expected to receive a membership action plan for joining NATO. This is a very important step on the way to joining the alliance. Georgia submitted the same application. At that time, it seemed that both countries were just one step away from their goal.
Here in Bucharest, we must make clear that NATO welcomes the aspirations of Georgia and Ukraine for their membership in NATO and offers them a clear path forward to meet that goal.
But the Bucharest summit went down in history as a summit of broken hopes and major scandals. Because of the position of France and Germany, the decision to grant the map was postponed for both Ukraine and Georgia. Many experts later said that this happened not least because of pressure and blackmail from Russia. Putin was invited to the summit, and he openly threatened Western countries from the podium. There was virtually no reaction to his actions. And just 3 months later, Russian Federation troops, in violation of international norms, invaded the territory of independent Georgia. Then came the year 2014, the Russian invasion of Crimea, and the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine. The appetite of the war criminal was growing, and he had no intention of stopping. Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine woke NATO from its lethargic slumber. The alliance began to strengthen and expand. In the spring of 2022, Sweden and Finland applied to join, countries that had proclaimed military neutrality for many years. In the fall of that same year, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukraine was submitting an application to join the alliance through an accelerated procedure. De facto, Ukraine had already proven its compatibility with NATO standards, and on the battlefield, it was now defending both itself and all of Europe.
We are taking our defining step.
We are making our decisive move by signing Ukraine's application for accelerated NATO membership.
Everyone expected that the July summit in Vilnius would be decisive, that the Allies would move from promising that Ukraine would become a NATO member to a clear roadmap of how, and most importantly, when this would happen. But the position of many countries was more than cautious. At this summit, the Ukraine-NATO Council was established, and a declaration on security guarantees for Kyiv was signed. But the fateful decision was postponed once again.
We reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This would change Ukraine's membership path from a 2-step process to a 1-step process. We also made clear that we will issue an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO when allies agree and conditions are met.
At the anniversary 75th summit in Washington, it was already expected that Ukraine would not be invited to join the alliance. Many Western leaders have openly stated that as long as the war between Russia and Ukraine continues, this is impossible. Kiev was promised additional air defense systems, F-16 fighter jets, 40 billion euros in military aid for a year, and the transfer of the Ramstein format from the US to NATO. Over the year from the summit in Washington to the summit in The Hague, the position of the NATO member countries has hardly changed. The alliance now has a new Secretary General. Last October, a great friend of Ukraine, former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, took on the role. And he promises to do everything possible both for Ukraine's defense and for its integration into the alliance.
We have an important summit coming up, including important decisions on Ukraine, which is really building on Washington, the summit last year, where we decided that there is this irreversible path for Ukraine into NATO. And we're building that bridge as we speak. I made yesterday an announcement that European and Canadian allies have now pledged more than 35 billion euros in support for Ukraine. Which is more than last year, because last year, for the full year, it was over 50 billion. Now, before the 1st of July, it is already 35 billion. So we can safely assume that for the full year, it will be more than last year.
The summit in The Hague is meant to demonstrate to the world, and first and foremost to Putin, the unity of the alliance. After all, it was Russia that Mark Rutte called the main threat to the security of the bloc's member countries. The goal of the Allies is to make Ukraine so strong that the Kremlin dictator will never again attempt to seize even a single square meter of our country. At every meeting, Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized, Putin can only be forced into peace, otherwise he will continue to kill and wipe entire cities off the map.
Russia must understand that rules exist. Putin pretends he doesn't understand what rules shape the modern world, and here, in The Hague, I want to say this very clearly. For Putin, there is a rule, do not kill. There is a rule, do not act like a beast toward people. There is a rule, do not burn down cities and villages. There is also a rule, do not justify or sponsor terror. There is a rule, do not steal children. And if you break such rules, there must be responsibility. It may be hard for us to understand, but these are the very rules that form everything from the UN Charter and international law to our shared European way of life.
NATO has also realized that Putin has no intention of stopping. The alliance is constantly talking about how Russia is building up its military potential and will try to attack one of the bloc's countries within the next 5 years. Now the alliance is planning to increase its air and missile defense by 400% and to set up the production of thousands of armored vehicles and tanks and millions of artillery shells. And many, both politicians and experts, are increasingly saying that Ukraine's accession to NATO is now more necessary for the bloc itself. Ukraine has enormous combat experience that the partners do not have. Our country is actively developing and producing its own weapons and knows how to counter cyber attacks and energy challenges. All of this could become a huge contribution to future transatlantic security.